Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing the right to disconnect and employment law. Now, Andrew, this type of legislation is new to Ontario, but it's been used in other places, other countries, and other jurisdictions. What can we learn from other places the right to disconnect legislation exists?
That's right, Christine. Laws like this really aren't new. We've seen similar laws in France, Spain, the UK, and Belgium applied to varying degrees. And I'm sure there's others. I'm not specifically qualified to talk about the implementation of that legislation in those countries, but the extent to which they are effective, from what I've read, is arguable. I think in remote work arrangements, and particularly for employees who perform client services and so-called knowledge workers, the lines between work and personal life can get pretty blurred. For these kinds of employees, the way they produce work isn't linear. They'll perform personal tasks during the day or during what's considered the normal work day, and then work during what's considered personal time. And it's not the kind of work where you can easily turn it off and say, okay, I'm not going to think about this task or answer any client calls after 5 p.m. and I'll start thinking about it again at 9 a.m. tomorrow. It just doesn't work like that. So I guess, what I'm saying is that it's not clear how much of an impact this legislation will have for most employees and how much it has in these other jurisdictions. The kinds of employees that perform manual tasks probably already don't answer work emails and calls when they're off the clock. And the kinds of employees who do are, for the most part, or could be exempt from hours work and overtime provisions. So they're always on the clock. But as Mackenzie says, it technically does apply to everybody. So hopefully it should have some impact.
Now, Mackenzie, you and Andrew have both pointed out that this is just a requirement to create a policy by employers. And to me, this seems a bit more like an attempt to create a cultural shift. How much of that do you think is true versus this being something that's really enforceable? Is this about really a change to the law, or is this a change to culture? And which one is more important?
Honestly, I think it's both. I think it's a really important step that the Ontario government is taking towards, spurring that cultural shift. So it's clear, the Ontario government doesn't know each employer's specific needs. And I think that's one of the main reasons why they haven't mandated certain things to be in these policies. They've given employers the ability to choose what they will put in it. But it's really no surprise that employers who prioritize a healthy work-life balance tend to have a happier workforce with less burnout and a higher talent retention. So I think in terms of whether or not the legislation really forces us into that direction, I think the cultural shift is kind of already brewing. And I'm hoping that this legislation will be an important first step towards that.
Andrew, same question to you. Do you think this is more about a legislative shift or a cultural shift? And which one would make a bigger difference?
Yeah, I think there's 2 points to say here. I think, this legislation clearly stems from what employees have experienced during the pandemic. I've read that work days are just getting longer and longer as you work from home, 10, 11 hours. So I think it kind of was created out of that. There's obviously a political angle to this, an election coming up, the desire for the current government to appeal to a certain segment of the actually, a lot of the population. That's part of it as well. But does it kind of follow up on a current cultural shift that started during the pandemic? I think it did.
Andrew, last question. We've got about 30 seconds, but we've been talking about Ontario. Do you think that this type of legislation, we can expect it to see in other jurisdictions in Canada?
There's always the possibility that it'll spread to other provinces, for sure. I know that the federal government is considering implementing similar legislation, so the Canada Labour Code could be amended to include similar legislation. So watch out for that.